Vida stood in the small living room she once called home, her hand wrapped tightly around Diz's arm. She was 33 now, wearing a red dress that cost more than the couch Johan sat on. Her husband, no, her ex-husband, stared up at her from his wheelchair, his face pale and confused. She took a breath and spoke the words she had rehearsed 100 times in the mirror. Johan, I came here to tell you it's over. Completely over. I've moved on with my life, and you need to accept that. Her voice was cold, like winter wind cutting through glass. Diz, her boss and now her new husband, stood beside her with a smirk on his face. He was 45, broad-shouldered, and wore a suit that screamed money and power. Johan, 37 and broken in more ways than one, gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. His right leg, the one shattered in the crash 3 years ago, rested uselessly beneath a blanket. He opened his mouth to speak, but Vida cut him off. You don't bring anything to the table anymore, Johan. I'm tired of being your nurse, your bank, your everything. Diz can give me the life I deserve. Diz laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the walls. Face it, man. You're done. She's mine now, and there's nothing you can do about it. He squeezed Vida's waist possessively. Johan's eyes filled with tears, but he refused to let them fall. He had cried enough over the past year, watching his wife slip away while he struggled just to stand. Vida turned toward the door, ready to leave this chapter of her life behind forever. But then the doorbell rang. It was loud, cutting through the tension like a knife. Vida froze. Diz frowned. Johan looked toward the door, confused. No one ever visited anymore. His friends had disappeared when the money ran out. When he became the man in the wheelchair, no one wanted to be around. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Diz muttered something under his breath and walked to the door, yanking it open with irritation. Standing on the doorstep were two men. One was Anthony, Johan's best friend since childhood, tall and serious-faced. The other was a stranger, an older man in an expensive gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. His eyes were sharp, calculating, like he could see through walls and into souls. Who the hell are you? Diz demanded, blocking the doorway. Anthony didn't answer him. He looked past Diz, straight at Johan, and his expression softened. Johan, we need to talk. Right now. The man in the suit stepped forward. His voice was calm, professional, the kind of voice that commanded respect without shouting. My name is Harold Westfield. I'm an attorney. I represent the estate of Richard Harlow. Johan's breath caught in his throat. Richard Harlow. His father, the man who had died 2 weeks after Johan's accident, leaving him completely alone in the world. Vida's eyes narrowed. Diz crossed his arms. What does this have to do with anything? We're in the middle of something here. Harold Westfield smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who held all the cards and knew it. Oh, I think it has everything to do with everything, Mr. Diz. May we come in? Oh, you're hooked already? Yeah, I knew it. Subscribe now or you'll never know what happens next. Don't test me. 8 years earlier, Vida had been 24 and full of dreams. She worked as a receptionist at a marketing firm in Portland, Oregon, making just enough to pay rent on a tiny studio apartment. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Then she met Johan at a neighborhood barbecue on a warm Saturday in July. He was 28, with kind eyes and a smile that made her feel safe. Johan worked for the city transit system, driving buses through downtown Portland. It wasn't a fancy job, but he took pride in it. He greeted every passenger, remembered the regulars, helped elderly people with their bags. Vida loved that about him. He was gentle in a world that felt harsh. On their first date, he took her to a food cart festival, and they ate tacos and laughed until their stomachs hurt. 6 months later, he proposed with a simple silver ring he'd saved 3 months of paychecks to buy. Vida said yes without hesitation. They got married at a small church with 20 guests, mostly family and close friends. Vida wore a white dress from a consignment shop, and Johan wore his father's old suit. It was perfect. It was enough. Their apartment was small, but they filled it with love. They cooked meals together, watched movies on an old television, and talked about the future. They wanted children, a house with a backyard, maybe a dog. But the years passed, and the children never came. Vida went to doctors who ran tests and gave vague answers. Johan held her hand through every appointment, every disappointment. By their 8th anniversary, the cracks were starting to show. Not big ones, just little fractures that come when dreams don't match reality. But they still loved each other. They still tried. Vida would come home from work exhausted, and Johan would have dinner waiting. He wasn't perfect, but he was hers, and she was his. That was enough. Until March 29, 2010. That morning, Johan kissed Vida goodbye before his early shift. The rain was starting to fall, light at first, then heavier. He told her he loved her. She told him to drive safe, not knowing those would be the last normal words they'd ever exchange. As Johan walked out the door, Vida felt a strange chill. She didn't know why, but she almost called him back, almost told him to stay home. But she didn't. She let him go, and by nightfall, everything they had built together would be shattered beyond recognition. The call came at 8:17 that evening. Vida was folding laundry when her phone rang. The number was from the hospital. Her hand started shaking before she even answered. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, detached. "Mrs. Harlow, your husband has been in an accident. You need to come to Providence Medical Center immediately." Vida dropped the phone. She grabbed her keys, her purse, didn't even lock the door behind her. The drive to the hospital was a blur of rain and red lights. She ran through the emergency room doors, gasping Johan's name to the nurse at the desk. They took her to a waiting room painted in cheerful colors that felt like a cruel joke. A doctor came out an hour later. He was young, tired-looking, with kind eyes that had seen too much tragedy. "Mrs. Harlow, your husband is stable, but his injuries are severe." The bus he was driving went off the road during the storm. It rolled into a ditch. Johan's right leg took the worst of it. The doctor paused, choosing his words carefully. "Multiple fractures in the femur, tibia, and fibula. Extensive nerve damage. We've done what we can, but he's going to need a wheelchair for the foreseeable future. Possibly permanently." Vida felt the room tilt. Wheelchair. Permanently. Those words didn't make sense. Johan was strong, healthy, only 36. This couldn't be real. She demanded to see him. They led her to a room where Johan lay in a hospital bed, his right leg wrapped in bandages and elevated. His face was pale, streaked with dried blood and tears. When he saw Vida, he tried to smile, but it came out broken. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Vida collapsed into the chair beside him, gripping his hand. "Don't apologize. Don't you dare apologize. We'll get through this." But even as she said the words, a dark seed of doubt planted itself in her heart. 2 weeks later, at 3 in the morning, Johan's phone rang. He answered it with shaking hands, still groggy from pain medication. The voice on the other end belonged to his aunt. "Johan, it's your father. He collapsed at work. Heart attack." They tried to revive him, but he's gone. Johan dropped the phone. The sound it made hitting the floor was the sound of his entire world crumbling. Richard Harlow's funeral was held on a grey Tuesday morning. Rain fell in sheets, turning the cemetery into a muddy mess. Johan sat in his wheelchair under a black umbrella, staring at the simple casket being lowered into the ground. Only a handful of people attended, mostly distant relatives Johan barely knew. His father had been a quiet man, private, always working. Vida stood beside Johan, one hand on his shoulder. She felt his body shake with silent sobs. She wanted to comfort him, but her own exhaustion was starting to weigh her down. The medical bills were piling up. Johan's disability payments from the transit company barely covered rent. She was working overtime just to keep food on the table. Richard had worked in import and export, something vague Johan never fully understood. His father traveled often, was rarely home when Johan was growing up. They weren't close, but Johan had always hoped one day they would be. Now that chance was gone forever. After the funeral, Johan and Vida returned to their apartment in silence. Johan transferred himself from the wheelchair to the couch, his arms trembling from the effort. He stared at the wall, not speaking, barely blinking. Vida made tea, neither of them drank. She sat beside him, and for the first time in their marriage, she didn't know what to say. The silence between them felt heavy, suffocating. That night, Vida lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Johan slept fitfully beside her, mumbling in his dreams. She thought about their life before the accident, before the loss. It felt like a different lifetime, a different Vida. She didn't recognize the woman she was becoming, the woman who resented the sound of Johan's wheelchair, who flinched when he reached for her. The next morning, Vida's phone buzzed. It was a text from her boss, Dizes. Heard about your husband's father. Take 2 days off this week to be with him. Whatever you need. Vida stared at the message. It seemed kind, generous. She texted back a thank you, not knowing she was stepping into a trap that would destroy everything. Diz's voice echoed in her mind even after she put the phone down. His tone had always been friendly, maybe too friendly, but Vida was grateful. She needed help, needed someone to see her as more than just Johan's caretaker. She didn't realize kindness could be a weapon. Diz's Kane was 45, divorced twice, and hungry for control. He ran the marketing firm where Vida worked with an iron fist wrapped in a charming smile. He noticed Vida the moment she walked through his door 8 years ago, young and bright-eyed. But she'd been untouchable then, happily married, glowing with love for her husband. Now, though, now she was vulnerable. Dizes could see it in the way her shoulders sagged, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she flinched when her phone rang with another medical bill notification. Vulnerability was opportunity. He started small, offering her the 2 days off, then a bonus for her hard work during difficult times. Vida accepted gratefully. The money helped. It felt like a lifeline. Dizes began calling her into his office more often, asking about her husband's condition with practiced concern. How's Johan doing? That must be so hard on you. You're so strong, Vida. Not many women could handle what you're going through. His words felt like warm water on frozen skin. He promoted her to junior account manager with a 15% raise. Vida came home that evening with tears of relief. Johan smiled, proud of her, even as shame twisted in his gut. He couldn't provide any more. She was carrying them both. Dizes bought Vida lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown to celebrate her promotion. It felt harmless, but over the salmon and white wine, Dizes leaned closer. You deserve so much more, Vida. You're young, beautiful, talented. Don't let your circumstances define you. His hand brushed hers across the table. She pulled back, laughing nervously, but his words echoed in her mind all the way home. Johan was asleep when she arrived, exhausted from physical therapy. Dizes didn't stop there. He began orchestrating conversations with other employees. He paid Sarah from accounting to mention casually over coffee, "You know, Vida, you're basically a single mother without the kid. Is that really the life you want?" He convinced Marcus from sales to ask, "When was the last time Johan took you out? Treated you like a woman, not a nurse?" The words planted seeds. Vida started seeing Johan differently, not as her husband, her partner, but as weight pulling her down. She came home one evening to find Johan on the floor beside his wheelchair, having fallen trying to reach the bathroom alone. She helped him up, but her hands were rough, impatient. "You need to be more careful," she snapped. Johan looked at her with wounded eyes. "I'm trying, Vida. I'm trying so hard." But she turned away, exhausted, resentful, already half gone. That night, Diz's texted her, "Dinner tomorrow? You look like you could use a break." Vida stared at the message for a long time before typing back one word that would change everything. "Yes." Diz's took Vida to a steakhouse where the cheapest meal cost more than Johan's weekly disability check. She felt out of place at first, surrounded by crystal glasses and soft lighting. But Diz's made her feel seen, important, like she mattered. He ordered wine without asking the price, laughed at her jokes, complimented her dress. "You light up a room, Vida. I don't think you realize how special you are." His words wrapped around her like silk. She drank more wine than she should have, laughed louder than she meant to. For a few hours, she forgot about wheelchairs and medical bills and the hollow look in Johan's eyes. She forgot she was married. When Dizz drove her home, he leaned across the console and kissed her cheek. "You deserve happiness, Vida. Don't forget that." She got out of the car feeling dizzy, guilty, exhilarated. Johan was awake when she came in, waiting by the window. "Where were you? I was worried." His voice was small, afraid. "Working late," Vida lied, the words coming too easily. She didn't meet his eyes. Johan wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. So he did, even though he could smell cologne that wasn't his on her skin. The lies became easier after that. Vida stayed late at the office more often, came home smelling like expensive restaurants and men's cologne. Meanwhile, Johan was drowning. He applied for online jobs, dozens of them, but no one wanted to hire a man who couldn't walk. His savings were gone. His pride was shattered. He watched Vida slip away and felt powerless to stop it. One night, he tried to cook dinner, wanting to do something, anything, to make her smile again. But he dropped the pot, burned his hand, made a mess of the kitchen. When Vida came home and saw the disaster, she didn't comfort him. She exploded. "I can't do this anymore, Johan. I can't be your mother and your wife and the only one holding us together. What do you even contribute anymore?" Her words cut deeper than any knife. Johan sat in his wheelchair, hand bandaged, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll try harder. I promise." But Vida was already walking away, already packing a suitcase with shaking hands. She didn't look back when she said, "I'm staying at a hotel tonight. I need space." The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty apartment. Johan sat alone in the dark, listening to the sound of his own breathing, wondering how everything had fallen apart so completely. Wait, still not subscribed? You're missing wild plot twists like this weekly. Hit that button before Johan's next move. Vida moved into a hotel near her office. It was expensive, but Dizz covered half the cost, calling it a personal loan. She told herself it was temporary, just until she figured things out. But days turned into weeks, and she didn't go back. Johan called her every day. She let most of the calls go to voicemail, listening to his broken voice begging her to come home. At work, Dizz was always there, always attentive. He bought her designer clothes so she'd look the part of a manager. He took her to client dinners where she felt important, valued, seen. He never pushed physically, but his words wrapped around her mind like chains she didn't recognize as restraints. "You're too young to be stuck playing nurse to a man who can't take care of himself." Vida's co-workers noticed the change. Some whispered behind her back. Others, the ones Dizz had carefully influenced, encouraged her. "You're glowing, Vida. This separation is good for you." She started believing it. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, but she convinced herself this version was better, stronger, free. Johan, meanwhile, was falling apart. He stopped shaving, stopped showering regularly. His apartment became a prison of dirty dishes and unwashed laundry. The only person who still visited was Anthony, his best friend from college. Anthony was 35, worked in IT, and had stood by Johan through everything. When he saw the state Johan was in, he was horrified. "Man, you can't live like this. When's the last time you ate a real meal?" Anthony cleaned the apartment, forced Johan to shower, made him talk. Johan told him everything, how Vida had changed, how she looked at him with disgust instead of love, how disease was poisoning her mind. Anthony's jaw clenched with anger. "That bastard is manipulating her, Johan. Can't you see that?" But Johan shook his head weakly. "She's making her own choices. I can't force her to love me anymore." His voice was defeated, hollow. Anthony refused to accept it. That night, he made a decision. He was going to find out everything he could about Johan's situation, starting with Johan's father's estate. Richard Harlow had been a mystery even to his own son. But Anthony had a cousin, Miranda, who worked at a prestigious law firm downtown. He called her, asked for a favor. "I need you to look into Richard Harlow's estate records." Quietly, Miranda hesitated but agreed. A week later, she called Anthony back, her voice shaking. "Anthony, you need to come to my office. Now. What I found, you're not going to believe." Anthony sat across from Miranda in her glass-walled office overlooking downtown Portland. She slid a folder across the desk, her hands trembling slightly. "I wasn't supposed to access these files. They are sealed, restricted, but I called in a favor with someone in probate records." She opened the folder, and Anthony's eyes widened as he scanned the documents inside. Richard Harlow, import-export business. That's what he always told people, right? Anthony nodded. Miranda continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was a cover. Richard Harlow built a logistics empire, Anthony. International shipping, warehouses on 3 continents, contracts with Fortune 500 companies. He kept everything hidden, operated through shell corporations and offshore accounts." Anthony's heart was pounding. Why would he hide it? Why live like he was barely scraping by? Miranda pulled out another document, a detailed asset statement. According to this, Richard Harlow's estate is valued at $17 billion. Billion, Anthony. With a B. The room seemed to tilt. Anthony gripped the edge of the desk. "Johan doesn't know. He has no idea." Miranda shook her head. "The estate is in probate, but according to the will, the primary beneficiary is Johan Harlow. $15 billion to him, $2 billion to various charities. There's a lawyer assigned to the estate, a Harold Westfield. He's been trying to contact Johan 4 months, but the address on file is outdated." Anthony's mind raced. Johan was living in poverty, abandoned by his wife, drowning in debt, while sitting on a $15 billion inheritance. "We need to contact this lawyer. Now." Miranda handed him a business card. "I already did. He's expecting your call." "But Anthony, there's something else." She pulled out another document, this one a letter written in Richard's hand. This was attached to the will. It explains why he kept everything secret. He was protecting Johan. Richard grew up poor, made his fortune through hard work and ruthless business deals. He had enemies, people who would have targeted his son for ransom or worse. So he lived modestly, kept Johan ignorant, planned to reveal everything when the time was right. Anthony felt tears prick his eyes. Richard Harlow had been a distant father, but everything he did was to keep Johan safe. "The time is right now," Anthony said, his voice firm. He called Harold Westfield immediately. The lawyer's voice was smooth, professional. "Mr. Anthony, I've been trying to reach Johan for 6 months. Where is he? In a wheelchair in a tiny apartment, abandoned by his wife, thinking he has nothing left to live for. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then we need to fix that immediately. I'll gather the necessary documents. When can we meet? Anton thought about Vida, about her plans to officially divorce Johan, about the way she'd paraded her new relationship with Dizzes. She's coming to his apartment this week. She's bringing her new husband to finalize everything, to rub salt in the wound. Harold Westfield's voice turned cold, calculated. Then that's when we'll make our move. I'll be there. Let's give them a day they'll never forget. Anton felt a grim smile cross his face. Justice was coming, and it was going to arrive with the force of $17 billion. Vida filed for divorce on a Monday morning. She sat in the lawyer's office, signing papers with hands that barely shook anymore. Dizzes sat beside her, his hand on her knee, possessive and proud. The lawyer, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, asked the standard questions. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Harlow? Reconciliation is always an option. Vida's voice was firm. I'm sure. I've moved on. My husband and I, we're not compatible anymore. Dizzes squeezed her knee, and she felt a rush of something that might have been power or might have been shame. She didn't examine it too closely. The divorce would be final in 60 days unless Johan contested it. Vida doubted he would. He had nothing left to fight with. That evening, Dizzes proposed. They were in his penthouse apartment, 30 floors above the city, drinking champagne. He got down on one knee with a ring that cost more than Johan's car. Vida came. I like the sound of that. Marry me. Let me give you the life you deserve. Vida said yes, and the ring felt heavy on her finger. They decided to tell Johan together. Dizzes insisted on it. He needs to see that you've moved on, that you're happy. It'll give him closure. Vida agreed, ignoring the small voice in her head that whispered this was cruel. They scheduled a visit for Friday afternoon. Vida rehearsed what she would say, how she would stand, the expression she would wear. Meanwhile, Johan received a strange phone call. It was from a law office, asking him to be home Friday afternoon for an important meeting regarding his father's estate. Johan was confused but agreed. He assumed it was some final paperwork, maybe a small life insurance policy. He didn't dare hope for more. Anton came over Thursday night to help Johan clean the apartment. Why are you making such a fuss? Johan asked as Anton scrubbed the kitchen counters. Anton smiled mysteriously. Just trust me, man. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. Johan didn't understand, but he was grateful for the company. He hadn't felt hope in so long. It felt foreign when it tried to creep into his chest. Friday morning arrived clear and cold. Johan woke early, showered, put on clean clothes for the first time in weeks. He didn't know why, but something in the air felt different, charged with possibility. At 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Johan wheeled himself to the door and opened it to find Vida and Dizzes standing on his doorstep. Vida wore a red dress and expensive perfume. Dizzes wore a suit and a smirk. Johan's heart sank. This was it, the final blow. Vida walked into the apartment like she owned it, her heels clicking on the old wooden floor. Dizzes followed, looking around with barely concealed disgust. So this is how the other half lives, he muttered. Johan wheeled himself back to the living room, his heart hammering in his chest. He knew what was coming. He'd known for months. Vida stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped in front of her. Johan, we need to talk. Her voice was calm, rehearsed. I've filed for divorce. It'll be final in 60 days. I've moved on with my life, and I think it's best if you do the same. She held up her left hand, showing off the engagement ring. Dizzes and I are getting married. Johan felt something inside him break. Not his heart, that had broken months ago. Something deeper, his sense of self, his dignity. He looked at Vida, this woman he'd loved for 8 years, and saw a stranger. "I loved you," he whispered. "I gave you everything I had." Vida's expression didn't change. "And it wasn't enough, Johan. You're not enough." Dizzy stepped forward, draping his arm around Vida's shoulders. "Face it, Harlow. You're a cripple with no job, no money, and no future. Vida needs a real man, someone who can provide for her. That's not you anymore. Hell, it was never really you." His words were designed to cut, and they did, deep and brutal. Johan opened his mouth to respond, but the doorbell rang again. Everyone froze. Johan wasn't expecting anyone else. Vida frowned. Dizzy looked annoyed. "You expecting someone?" he demanded. Johan shook his head, wheeling toward the door. When he opened it, Anthony stood there with a slight smile, and beside him was a man Johan didn't recognize. Harold Westfield was in his early 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He wore a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than Johan's entire apartment. "Johan Harlow," his voice was smooth, professional. "I'm Harold Westfield, attorney for the estate of Richard Harlow. May we come in?" Johan nodded, confused and overwhelmed. Anthony gave him an encouraging nod as they entered. Vida and Dizzy stood frozen in the living room. Dizzy recovered first. "What the hell is this? We're in the middle of something here." Harold set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it slowly, deliberately, like a magician preparing his greatest trick. "I apologize for the interruption, but this matter cannot wait. Johan, I've been trying to reach you for 6 months regarding your father's estate. I have documents here that require your immediate attention." He pulled out a stack of papers, each one embossed with official seals and legal stamps. Vida's eyes narrowed. "Estate?" Johan's father was a nobody. Harold turned to her with a cold smile. "On the contrary, Mrs. Harlow, Richard Harlow was one of the wealthiest men in the Pacific Northwest. He simply chose to live discreetly." The room went silent except for the sound of Harold opening folders and spreading documents across the table. Johan stared at the papers, unable to process what he was seeing. "Johan, your father built an empire. International logistics, shipping, warehousing. His estate is valued at $17 billion. According to his will, you are the primary beneficiary. $15 billion, to be exact. $2 billion goes to various charities." Harold looked up, meeting Johan's stunned gaze. "Congratulations, Mr. Harlow. You're one of the richest men in America." The words hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Vida's face went white. She stumbled backward, gripping the back of the couch for support. "What? That's impossible. Richard was a nobody. He lived in a tiny house. He drove a 15-year-old car." Harold pulled out more documents, bank statements with numbers so large they seemed fake. "Your father was a very private man, Mrs. Harlow. He accumulated his wealth quietly and protected his son from the dangers that come with it." Dizzy snatched one of the papers from the table, his hands shaking. His eyes scanned the numbers, and the color drained from his face. "This can't be real. This is some kind of scam." Anthony stepped forward, his voice hard. "It's real, Dizzy. Every penny. Johan's father left him everything. Properties, businesses, investments. It's all his." Johan sat frozen in his wheelchair, unable to speak, unable to think. $15 billion. The number was too big to comprehend. Harold continued, his voice matter-of-fact. "Johan, there are properties in 12 countries, a yacht in Monaco, a private jet, investment portfolios, stock holdings. Your father built this empire over 40 years, and now it's yours." Vida's knees buckled. She sat down hard on the couch, her expensive ring catching the light. Her mind was racing, calculating, panicking. She'd just divorced a billionaire. She'd traded Johan for Dizzes, and Dizzes wasn't worth a fraction of what Johan now had. She looked up at Johan, her eyes suddenly soft, pleading. "Johan, baby, I made a mistake." Dizzes spun on her, his face twisted with rage. "What did you just say?" Vida ignored him, standing and moving toward Johan. "I was stressed, overwhelmed. I wasn't thinking clearly. We can work this out. We've been together 8 years. That has to mean something." Her voice was desperate, syrupy sweet, the voice she used to use when she wanted something. Johan looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing. No love, no hate, just emptiness. "You called me not enough, Vida. You said I was a cripple with no future. That was 10 minutes ago." His voice was calm, steady, nothing like the broken man she'd been manipulating for months. Vida reached for his hand. He pulled away. Dizzes grabbed Vida's arm, yanking her back. "You stupid woman. You had no idea. You threw away a billionaire for me?" He was shouting now, his face red with fury. Vida jerked her arm free. "Don't touch me. This is your fault. You're the one who convinced me to leave him. You said he was worthless. He was worthless. He is worthless." Dizzes jabbed a finger at Johan. "Money doesn't change the fact that he's a cripple." The word echoed through the room. Harold Westfield stood slowly, his expression icy. "Mr. Dizzes, I suggest you leave. Now, before I have security remove you." Dizzes laughed bitterly. "Security? You think I'm afraid of you?" Anthony stepped forward, and despite being several inches shorter than Dizzes, his presence was threatening. "You should be afraid of me. Get out, both of you." Vida was crying now, mascara running down her face. "Johan, please. I love you. I've always loved you. I was confused. Please give me another chance." Johan wheeled himself to the door and opened it. "Goodbye, Vida. The divorce papers are fine. I won't contest them. Consider this your closure." His voice was final, a door slamming shut forever. Vida sobbed harder, reaching for him, but Dizzes grabbed her arm again, dragging her toward the door. "Come on. We're leaving." As they stumbled out, their argument echoed down the hallway. "This is your fault." "My fault? You're the one who couldn't keep your meal ticket. I hate you. I hate you more." The door closed, and suddenly the apartment was quiet. Johan sat there, staring at the closed door, and then he started laughing. It was a broken sound at first, then stronger, fuller. Anthony and Harold exchanged glances. Johan turned to face them, tears streaming down his face, but he was smiling. "I'm free," he whispered. "I'm finally free." 2 weeks later, Johan and Anthony boarded a private jet to New Delhi, India. Harold had arranged everything, from the luxury accommodations to the appointment with Dr. Vikram Patel, one of the world's leading orthopedic surgeons. Johan stared out the window as the plane lifted off, watching Portland disappear beneath the clouds. It felt symbolic, leaving behind everything that had broken him. Dr. Patel was a small man in his 50s with kind eyes and steady hands. He reviewed Johan's medical records and X-rays with intense focus. "The damage is extensive, but not irreparable. The previous surgeries were adequate for emergency stabilization, but they didn't address the nerve damage or properly realign the bone fragments. We can fix this." Hope bloomed in Johan's chest for the first time in years. The first surgery lasted 12 hours. Johan woke in a recovery room with Anthony sitting beside him. "How do you feel?" Anthony asked. Johan's leg was wrapped in bandages and suspended in traction, but beneath the pain medication, he felt something he hadn't felt since the accident. "Possibility. Like maybe I can walk again," Johan whispered. There were 3 more surgeries over the next 4 months. Each one was grueling, painful, exhausting. But Dr. Patel was a master of his craft. He repaired torn ligaments, removed scar tissue, realigned bones with titanium pins and plates. Between surgeries, Johan underwent intensive physical therapy. The therapists pushed him to his limits, and Johan pushed back harder. The first time Johan stood without support, he cried. His legs shook violently, and he could only hold the position for 30 seconds before collapsing back into the wheelchair. But those 30 seconds felt like victory. Every day he stood a little longer, took a few more steps with the walker, built strength in muscles that had atrophied. Anthony was there, through it all, encouraging, supporting, celebrating every small victory. "You're doing it, man. You're actually doing it." Johan would grip the walker, sweat pouring down his face, and force himself to take one more step, then another. Pain became his companion, but so did determination. 6 months after the first surgery, Dr. Patel removed the walker during a therapy session. "Try on your own, Johan." The room went silent. Johan stood, testing his weight on both legs. His right leg ached, protested, but it held. He took one shaky step forward, then another, then 10 more. He walked across the room, turned around, and walked back. Tears streamed down his face. Dr. Patel smiled. "You did it. You're walking again." The flight back to America felt different. Johan walked off the plane with a slight limp but without assistance. Reporters were waiting, having caught wind of the billionaire's son who'd overcome tragedy. Johan kept his head down, refusing interviews. This wasn't about publicity. This was about reclaiming his life. His father's funeral had been rushed, impersonal, wrong. Richard Harlow deserved better. Johan organized a memorial service at Portland's cathedral. Hundreds attended, people Johan had never met. They told stories of his father's quiet generosity, the scholarships he'd funded anonymously, the hospitals he'd built in developing countries, the disaster relief he'd bankrolled without seeking credit. Johan listened, learning about the father he'd never truly known. "He did all this good while keeping me safe," Johan said during his eulogy, his voice steady and strong. "He sacrificed a relationship with me so I could have a normal life, free from the dangers of wealth. I didn't understand then, but I do now. Thank you, Dad. I'll make you proud." The casket was laid to rest beside Johan's mother, together at last. With Harold's guidance, Johan established Harlow Industries. He invested in technology, sustainable logistics, green energy. He hired the best minds, created jobs, built something meaningful. Within a year, the company was valued at over $1 billion. Johan made Anthony vice president and gave him a 20% stake. "You saved my life," Johan said. "Now share my success." Anthony tried to refuse, but Johan insisted. "You were there when I had nothing. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. This is as much yours as it is mine." They stood in the corner office of their downtown high-rise, looking out over the city. Portland looked different from this height, full of possibility instead of pain. One evening, Johan stood in front of the mirror in his new penthouse apartment. He barely recognized himself. He'd gained back the weight he'd lost. His eyes were clear, his posture straight despite the slight limp. He picked up his phone and scrolled through messages. There were dozens from Vida, each one more desperate than the last. He deleted them without reading. He opened his laptop and booked a flight to Barcelona. 1 year had passed since the day his life changed. He'd rebuilt his body, his finances, his sense of self. But there was one thing still missing. Love. Real love, the kind that didn't come with conditions or calculations. "Time to see what the world has to offer," he said to his reflection. The man in the mirror smiled back, and for the first time in years, Johan recognized him. Barcelona was alive with color and sound when Johan arrived. He checked into a boutique hotel near the Gothic Quarter, declined the penthouse suite, and chose a simple room with a balcony overlooking the street. He wasn't here to show off wealth. He was here to find himself, or maybe to find someone who could see him without the money, without the past. He spent his days walking through La Rambla, sitting in small cafes, watching street performers. His limp was barely noticeable now, just a slight hitch in his stride that only those paying close attention would notice. He felt lighter here, anonymous, free from the weight of being Johan Harlow, billionaire. He was just Johan, a man exploring a beautiful city. On his fourth day, he found a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street. It had 6 tables, exposed brick walls, and the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon. Johan ordered in broken Spanish and sat by the window. That's when he saw her. She was maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a faded volunteer t-shirt. She sat at the table beside him, laptop open, completely absorbed in her work. Johan found himself glancing over, curious. She muttered to herself in English, making notes, occasionally laughing at something on her screen. When the waiter brought her coffee, she thanked him in fluent Spanish, her accent perfect. Johan was intrigued despite himself. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tentative. "I couldn't help but notice you're American." She looked up, surprised, then smiled. It was a genuine smile, reaching her eyes. "Guilty. Atlanta, originally." "You?" Johan felt his heart skip. "Portland, Oregon, not Maine." She laughed, and it was the most honest sound he'd heard in months. "I'm Elena," she said, extending her hand. "Johan," he replied, shaking it. Her grip was firm, confident. They talked 4 hours, the conversation flowing easily. Elena taught English at a school for children with disabilities. She'd moved to Barcelona 3 years ago after her husband died of cancer. "I needed a fresh start," she explained, her eyes distant. "Somewhere I could make a difference." Johan told her about the accident, about learning to walk again, but he left out the billions, the business empire, the inheritance. He wanted her to know him, not his money. Elena listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she cared about his answers. When he mentioned his wheelchair days, she didn't flinch or look away with pity. "My students are some of the strongest people I know," she said softly. "Disability doesn't define strength. Sometimes it reveals it." Johan felt something shift in his chest. This woman understood. She saw past surfaces to the person beneath. As the sun set, painting the cafe in golden light, Elena checked her watch. "I have to go. Class tomorrow morning." She hesitated. "Would you like to meet again? Maybe I could show you the real Barcelona, the parts tourists don't see." Johan smiled, feeling hope kindle in his chest. "I'd love that." They exchanged phone numbers, and as Elena walked away, Johan sat back in his chair, watching the street come alive with evening crowds. For the first time since Vida, he felt possibility. That night, he called Anthony. "I think I met someone," Johan said, unable to keep the smile from his voice. Anthony laughed. "About time, man. Tell me everything." Vida stood in front of the mirror in her tiny studio apartment, barely recognizing the woman staring back. The designer clothes were gone, sold to pay rent. The expensive makeup, traded for drugstore brands. Her hair needed cutting, her nails were chipped. She was 34 and felt like she'd aged 20 years in 12 months. The marriage to Dizzes had lasted exactly 4 months. They'd fought constantly, each blaming the other for missing out on Johan's fortune. Dizzes had grown cruel, controlling, showing his true colors without the need to impress. When Vida finally left, he'd laughed. "Good luck finding another meal ticket. You're damaged goods now." His words echoed in her mind constantly. She'd lost her job at the marketing firm shortly after. Dizzes had made sure of that, poisoning her reputation, spreading rumors. No one in her industry would hire her. She'd applied everywhere, taken whatever she could find. Now she worked retail at a department store, folding clothes and smiling at customers who treated her like she was invisible. Her apartment was a studio in a rundown building, nothing like the places she'd lived before. At night, she lay awake thinking about Johan, about the life she'd thrown away. She'd tried to contact him hundreds of times. Every message went unanswered. She'd even gone to Harlow Industries once, but security turned her away at the lobby. She saw his face everywhere. Magazine covers, business articles, charity event photos. Johan Harlow, tech mogul, philanthropist, eligible bachelor. In every photo, he looked healthy, happy, confident, walking without a limp, smiling without pain. He'd become everything she'd once dreamed of, and she'd destroyed her chance to share it with him. Her co-workers talked about him sometimes, not knowing she'd once been his wife. "He's so inspiring," one girl gushed. "Started from nothing after his accident, built an empire. And he's gorgeous." Vida excused herself to cry in the bathroom. Starting from nothing. He'd always had something. He'd had her, and she'd treated it like it was worthless. One evening, Vida saw Johan on the news. He was at a children's hospital, donating medical equipment. The camera panned across grateful families, sick children smiling. Johan knelt beside a boy in a wheelchair, talking to him like he was the most important person in the world. Vida remembered when Johan used to look at her that way. She pulled out a piece of paper and began writing a letter she knew she'd never send. "Dear Johan, I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. I was selfish, shallow, cruel. You deserved better than what I gave you. You were never not enough. I was the one who wasn't enough. I threw away the best thing in my life because I was too blind to see its value." Tears dripped onto the paper, smudging the ink. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just need you to know that I regret every moment, every word, every choice that led me away from you. You were the best man I ever knew, and I was too stupid to realize it until it was too late. I hope you find happiness, real happiness, the kind I never gave you." She signed it, folded it carefully, and put it in a drawer with dozens of other letters just like it. Letters she'd never send because what would be the point? Johan had moved on. He was living his best life, and she was living with the consequences of her choices. Some mistakes you don't get to fix. Vida turned off the lights and lay down on her small bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the ghost of a love she'd killed with her own hands. 6 months later, Johan sat in the same Barcelona cafe where he'd met Elena, watching her laugh at something the waiter said. She'd agreed to meet him here, at the place where everything started. The evening air was warm, carrying the scent of jasmine from the balcony above. Johan's hand trembled slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket. They'd spent the last 6 months together, slowly building something real. Elena still didn't know about his wealth, not really. She knew he had money, was successful, but Johan had been careful to keep his billionaire status hidden. He wanted her to love him for who he was, not what he had. Today, he was going to tell her everything. "Elena, there's something I need to talk to you about." His voice was serious enough that her smile faded into concern. "What's wrong?" Johan took her hands across the table. "Nothing's wrong. Everything is right, actually. But I haven't been completely honest with you about my life, about who I am." Elena's expression shifted, guarded. Johan rushed to continue. "My father died and left me an inheritance. A large one. $17 billion large." He watched her face carefully. Elena blinked, processing. "Billion? With a B?" Johan nodded. "I run a company called Harlow Industries. I have properties, investments, resources. I'm very wealthy. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to know me first." Elena sat back, overwhelmed. "You're a billionaire." It wasn't a question. Johan squeezed her hands. I'm Johan, the same man who spilled coffee on himself last week, the same man who cries at sad movies, the same man who thinks your laugh is the most beautiful sound in the world. The money doesn't change who I am. Elena studied his face for a long moment. Why tell me now? Johan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's breath caught. Because I want to spend the rest of my life with you, and I won't start that life with secrets. He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring, elegant but not ostentatious. Elena Cortez, will you marry me? Elena's eyes filled with tears. You barely know me. We've only known each other 6 months. Johan smiled. I know you volunteer every weekend at the children's center. I know you donate half your salary to cancer research in your husband's memory. I know you see people for who they are, not what they have. I know you make me want to be better. I know you held my hand when I told you about Vidal without judging me for staying as long as I did. I know you laugh with your whole body and cry at rescue animal videos. I know when I'm with you, I forget about the money and the business and all the noise. I just feel like me, the best version of me. Elena wiped her tears. Your ex-wife, she left you when you had nothing and came back when you had everything. How do you know I'm not doing the same thing? Johan stood, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair despite his leg protesting slightly. Because you didn't know I had everything, and you chose me anyway. That's how I know. Elena looked at the ring, then at Johan's face, and saw nothing but honesty and hope. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Johan slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, and the cafe erupted in applause from patrons who'd been eavesdropping. They laughed, embarrassed and happy, wrapped in each other's arms. 3 months later, they married in a small ceremony overlooking the Mediterranean. Anthony stood as best man, tears streaming down his face. Elena's sister was maid of honor. There were 50 guests, mostly friends and family, people who mattered. No press, no publicity, just love. Johan looked at Elena in her simple white dress and felt his heart overflow. After the ceremony, Johan and Elena visited the children's hospital Johan had funded in Portland. They walked through bright hallways filled with murals and laughter. A boy in a wheelchair rolled up to them, the same boy Johan had met a year ago. Mr. Harlow, you came. The boy's name was Marcus, and he was 9 years old. I wouldn't miss it, buddy. How's physical therapy going? Marcus beamed. Dr. Patel said I might walk again. Just like you. Johan knelt down, looking the boy in the eyes. Marcus, can I tell you something important? The boy nodded seriously. Walking again is great. I'm proud of you for working so hard. But you know what? You're already strong. You're already brave. Already complete. The wheelchair doesn't define you. Your heart does. Your courage does. Whether you walk or not, you're already everything you need to be. Marcus threw his arms around Johan's neck. Thank you, he whispered. Elena watched her husband with tears in her eyes, seeing the man he'd become, the man he'd always been beneath the pain. That evening, Johan and Elena stood on the balcony of their Portland home, looking out over the city lights. What are you thinking about? Elena asked, leaning against him. Johan wrapped his arms around her. I'm thinking about how losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me. Elena turned to look at him, questioning. Vida leaving broke me, but it also freed me. If she'd stayed, I would have spent my life trying to be enough for someone who would never be satisfied. I would have missed this, missed you, missed becoming who I was meant to be. He kissed her forehead. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the beginning of your best life. Elena smiled. You sound like a fortune cookie. Johan laughed. A very wise fortune cookie. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Johan thought about his father, about Anthon's loyalty, about the long road from wheelchair to walking, from poverty to wealth, from betrayal to love. True wealth, he'd learned, wasn't measured in billions. It was measured in moments like this. In friends who stayed when everyone else left. In the ability to help a child believe in himself. In finding someone who loved you not for what you had, but for who you were. Vida had taken his dignity, but she'd also given him something unexpected. She'd given him the chance to rebuild himself into someone stronger, kinder, more complete. She'd taught him that sometimes losing everything is how you discover what actually matters. And what mattered was standing right beside him, her hand in his, watching the night sky bloom with stars. Johan had walked through fire and come out gold, and he would spend the rest of his life being grateful for every scar that brought him here. Was Vida's karma deserved? Should Johan have forgiven her? Drop your take below and subscribe so you never miss these jaw-dropping stories that'll leave you speechless.